Happy Thursday. Welcome to the weekend wind down. Yes, I know it's Thursday, not Friday, but I'm trying to manifest a 4-day work week, which, one of these days is going to happen. It's not happening yet. So today's wine, look how cute it is. So this is from True Wine Connoisseurs. It's Latinx and Black owned. So we're going to try their Sauvignon Blanc. Let me pour some. All right. So glad y'all can hear me. So, all right, let me take my sip, child. Oh, it's good. I like it. I'm going to put so this is our agenda. We are going to talk about, this fake Trump lawyer because the children are wild. The children are truly wild. And then what everyone is talking about, what we're apparently going to talk about, unbeknownst to me, what I have done research about at 6 o'clock this morning. Joe Budden, Rory, and Mal, and the Joe Budden Podcast. We're going to talk about how Spotify and Patreon work because I saw people are curious and particularly about his Spotify deal. No, I've never seen that contract, but he's talked around it enough to where we can talk about it. And then we're going to talk about non-compete clauses, contracts, because there are a few people on his payroll that have no contract, which he divulged in his podcast, which is flabbergasting to me. And then we're going to take questions. So cool. So because I'm having a technological moment, I can't figure it out. We're just gonna roll with it, honey. There's nothing super important on these slides anyway. So there were a lot of funny tweets. So before we get into Joe Budden Podcast, in case you are wondering, what am I talking about Trump and his fake lawyer? So this child, actually young adult, decided in Florida that he wanted to pretend to be a lawyer. So he pulled the top law firm bios. He was a part of Trump's Students for America, which is why Trump is being implicated in his foolishness, because he allowed his mediocrity to think that he would get away with this. He pretended to be a lawyer and defrauded people out of tens of thousands of dollars and is now going to jail. So I'm just bringing it up because, Charles, it gave me a good laugh. I don't know why he thought that he would get away with this, pretending to be a 65-year-old white man when he was not. Of course it is, because, the land of the special. Yes. And I would have more details on that if, I had more time today, but maybe we'll re-bring it up because it got me a really good laugh. I remember that. Y'all, do y'all remember that man? He opened a whole OBGYN office. Do y'all remember him? Mess. Okay, so the juicy stuff, what we're here. Yes, Sarah put it beautifully. He was basically a lawyer catfish and a fool. Made me laugh. And then I was like, why are people... Also, then I felt bad. I was like, wait, you defrauded people out of actually a lot of money. Who's going to give these people who, unbeknownst to them, why they would have trusted you, their money back? Because it's not you. I'm sure he's a fool. I'm sure he spent the money off. So, yep. So on that note, we are going to move on to something I learned new about this morning when Steph was like, you should cover Joe Budden. So before, you guys have asked me to talk about Joe Budden's Spotify deal. So for context, if you are new here to our live that I do once a week on Thursdays, I am a former entertainment lawyer. I currently am a tech lawyer, which is why it always says former entertainment lawyer. If you want to know why I left entertainment, there's a video on that. And it brings me a lot of joy now that I can say there's a video on that. So yeah, you can find it. It's there. And so basically, a lot of people had asked a while ago, oh, let's talk about Joe Budden's Spotify deal, to which my answer has always been, oh, well, he talks about it, that it wasn't good in his opinion. It was unfair. However, he's never pulled a Kanye and released it, which is why we have the Kanye video to talk about, but no Joe Budden Spotify deal. However, he decided yesterday, on Wednesday, to go on a very long-winded, expletive-ridden rant against his co-host in his podcast and divulge more information. So we are going to talk about that. So specifically, let's get into some of these tweets because these tweets were hilarious. So yeah, so the Joe Budden Podcast, although named the Joe Budden Podcast, it does say small. Well, it did say small, with Rory and Mal, which were his two friends. And he specifically said, which I'm not going to get into the pettiness of all half the things he said. To be honest, I had never listened to his podcast before this, that Mal is his friend and Rory is not, which the internet took a flight with that. And he decided to take aim at poor Rory. So, child, it was a mess. So, but yes. So basically, one of the things that he brought up So a few of the things that he brought up and we're going to start with is first and foremost, it's like a bit of background. If you're not aware, Joe Budden has a very large podcast following. Him and his podcast were Spotify's first big deal, first big podcast deal. It was a very big win for him and for Spotify. Spotify basically not has a monopoly, but Spotify has the largest platform for podcasters. So they're paying out the podcasters, they are getting the big names, and Joe Budden was there, essentially, according to him, like their guinea pig. Like they didn't have a pricing structure set out because it's a new area. So podcasts are different where generally, like sometimes you can see the person's face. You can technically take a podcast and put it on YouTube too. But obviously sound quality needs to be good. Oh, thank you, Pocket Watching with JT. I appreciate you. Which if you send me money, oh, child, I wish today wasn't so rushed. I would have went and got what I wanted to show y'all. So one of my good friends for my birthday, thank you, Francis, got me a bottle of champagne. So I wanted to, which all of the money from my YouTube, if you guys don't know, goes towards my student loans that I'm trying to pay off. So if you donate money via stickers, I think it's called, child, I'm learning, or super chat, I'm going to write your names on it. So that way, when I pay off each increment, I have 5 left of my big 5. I've already paid off this year from year to date from last year, February 2020, over $80,000. So every single one of the big 5 that I pay off, I'm going to pop it open. So that way, can celebrate with y'all because y'all are helping me reach my goal and I appreciate it. So next live, I will bring it. And if I come on here without it, just remind me and I'll go get it. So we can start that. But so Joe Budden has this podcast and it's on Spotify. It's doing well. So he made a point to say there are a few things, I think, like as ground understanding, people that are not familiar, aka me, because I wasn't familiar, how this podcast started. It was his podcast. He started it with his assistant / lover at the time. Child, it was giving hostile work environment the way he was explaining it. That's not what we're here to talk about today. But he started it with her. He fired her. He then brought on Mal, who was his friend. And then Rory, according to him, just popped up. Like he was like, I don't know this man, but this man is just going on. What are your go-to podcast, Stephanie? I'm not a podcast person. So I feel like I would like the format, but I'm not really a podcast person. I love YouTube, but I'm not a podcast person. So I would love it before Harriet had a podcast. I would probably listen. I think she does if you're on her Patreon. So they start this podcast. The main attraction to Spotify is Joe Budden. Of course, Joe Budden is the name. That's who's going to get them the viewers. So that's how all this starts. The issue is then arising from Joe Budden's understanding and from my understanding of his rant that he is upset that they are asking for an audit of the books. Like, okay, the money seems funny to me. Let me see what's going on. Now, before we even get into that, a lot of guesstimation is going to happen because he said numerous times like, oh, reference the contract that he didn't show. So only he knows what's in it, him and them. We can't see that. I don't have any, unfortunately, magical powers to go see it. If he would like to send it out, hey, only pull a Kanye if you have Kanye money. That's all I'm going to say. I don't recommend people tweeting out their contracts because that generally is not going to end well. So he's under certain confidentiality provisions, which is why he hasn't released his agreement. But part of it is he was the name. So obviously he was compensated more. So for a step back, it would be helpful if we understand how the heck is Spotify paying out these people, which we will bring in my handy dandy PowerPoint that is halfway working. All right. So let's go add to stream. I'm sorry if y'all can't see it well. Okay. I'm going to press present. The only thing is then I can't see you, so no funny business. So with Spotify, I pulled a few just like headlines for you so we could talk about it. So basically, Spotify is similar in how AdSense runs. So AdSense pays me, like my CPM is like pretty good. The RPM is actually what matters, but the CPM is what people know, cost per milli, like how much per 1,000 views am I getting paid? Finance videos generally make upwards of like $15 to $20. Lawyer reacts videos between like $13 and $20 depending. And then that's the percentage that the advertiser is willing to pay. And then I get a portion of that. So I think YouTube were 45, 55. I don't remember. Something like that. Around like half is like what I get. So with Spotify, basically they are doing, so this is from The Verge. So advertisers are paying between, according to The Verge, $18 to $50 per 1,000 listeners that a show reaches, which is interesting. So this is just based off of listeners, which is not based off of streams, according to The Verge, which I think it's a mix of both, actually. I don't think it's just, they've tried a few different models because, again, this is brand new. I think at one point they were doing streams. Maybe they have switched to listeners. Maybe listeners is, more lucrative for them. Who knows? But basically, they're paying that, so you're getting paid a percentage. That's basically how this works. Now, with larger personalities, like this is, for example, Joe Rogan, not to be confused with Joe Budden, he signed a licensing deal, it's a specific thing, with Spotify for $100 million. So what exactly is a licensing deal, which we've talked about, I think, a few times in different contexts, and that's likely what Joe Budden has. Joe Budden probably has a mix of a streaming deal and a licensing deal. So a licensing deal would be, like, for example, now that we've been doing Wine and Chill since August, of last year. So we're like month 8 now, almost month 9. A licensing deal would be if I were to say to Spotify or somewhere else, hey, you can have you can license the entire library of Wine and Chill, and I want a portion of that money. Or you pay me, and then I'll let you license it. So you'll have exclusive rights. I will take it off of YouTube and give it to you. That's essentially what Joe Rogan did. And Joe Budden probably had a similar deal, because once it's exclusive, it's like, okay, I'm not going to post it anywhere else. It will only live on Spotify. How much are you going to pay me? So 100% fact, Joe Budden did not receive the Joe Rogan treatment, which is $100 million. He has said this numerous times that he believes his contract with Spotify was unfair. Joe Rogan for years said, I will never get on Spotify because they don't pay creators well. Well, Spotify now, because they are trying to jockey against Apple and get the most market share, they're like, okay, shell out the cash. Spotify is not making money off of this podcasting. The likelihood is to do the investment in podcasting now and podcasters, and in a couple years, they will make the money off of this. They have to pull in enough advertisers to recoup the money. YouTube/Google makes a lot of money because YouTube and Google get a shit ton of advertisers. Some of you complained, Stephanie, why is there so many ads on this? Only one person ever complained, which I was like, just press skip. Boo, is fine. And that's because I only get paid if I run ads. And if you guys nicely give me money, which is very kind. That's the only way a creator is getting paid. And then you can have sponsorships, etc. So if we go back to my little pulling of the headlines, there is a new way that got announced we're May 13th today, like 2 weeks ago. This is from Crunchbase. Or TechCrunch, sorry. So TechCrunch released an ad, and I meant to write TechCrunch on there. So this is from TechCrunch. And TechCrunch released an article that was saying, okay, they're going to start doing subscriptions. Spotify is testing it out. So they're going to try tiers. So these are suggested tiers, $2.99, $4.99, $7.99. So Spotify is going to allow the anchor creators, is what they're calling them, to mark entire fees as paid if they choose. And then they're going to see if the free episodes lure the listeners, and then, say you use a free episode and then put them behind a paywall. So Spotify is basically going to test out a bunch of different things to see, like, okay, what sticks? Like, how do we get the most money? So basically now, all of that. So there are various different ways that maybe are in his contract. And this is a heavy on the maybe also because during the live, I never remember to do it. This is not legal advice. This is for entertainment purposes only. And, take this with a grain of salt. Okay. All right. So the deal between Joe Budden, Rory, and Mal, we can make a few assumptions. One, Joe Budden has been very clear that he is the owner of the Joe Budden Podcast, aka he owns the copyright, the licensing, all of the IP rights. Thank you, Elle. All of the IP rights to the Joe Budden Podcast, which means if he's saying outright, I own this, he has an agreement, a contract with Rory Mal that says, hey, boo-boo, you are work for hire. A work for hire means you assign all of your rights into the IP to me. He made an interesting statement during his rant. He said that he let them, allowed them the opportunity to create their own YouTube and also use whatever podcast on their YouTube, which, if that's true, that's very kind. It would be like watching double of the things, but people do that. Like, for example, like I've seen people do lives and then one person will run the live and then the next week the other person will run the same live. because ideally you have two different audiences. So they could have done this. To Joe Budden's point, they never took the opportunity to create their own YouTube, create their own anything, which they could have done. However, when he said that, that's probably not during the Spotify deal, because the Spotify deal is exclusive. They couldn't have taken the IP from Spotify and put it somewhere else. Spotify would have sued them. So Michael asked, does YouTube pay creators for premium? Yes, they do. I have YouTube premium, so I don't see ads. Yes, we get paid for premium. I don't know what the percentage is, because I don't see like how many of my viewers watch premium. It just says like the small amount that I got from premium. Most of my money is from AdSense. My very small money, in case like y'all are wondering, when I do my student loan updates, which this month is late. So when that comes out at the end of the week, I always like talk about like, okay, here's my couple $100s I made, which a couple $100 hopefully will grow, and it goes towards my student loans, which is great. So with that, one of the things that Joe Budden said during his rant, let me make sure I'm going in order of our agenda. Oh, Patreon was next. Okay, so let's move to Patreon really quick, because Joe Budden now has a Patreon account that's called the Joe Budden Network. All right. So 1 second, let me add this. So let's go to Patreon, and I'm going to take we can do calls at the end if you guys want. So Patreon, this is the setup for Patreon. Patreon is a platform where basically Patreon is known to be the most creator friendly. Patreon is what they're doing is they are providing, they're providing the website, they're providing the hosting, they're providing everything. And all they do is take out a fee. Comparably, remember I just told you YouTube, I believe we are 45-55, with YouTube getting 55% of the AdSense money, or maybe I'm 55, whatever, it's a 10% difference. They are getting a shit ton of my money, versus if I were to put all of these videos on Patreon, clearly I would make a lot more money. So with Patreon Lite, they only take 5% of your monthly income, Patreon Pro 8%, Patreon Premium 12%. So why are the percentages different? Simply because you get different things. It didn't all fit on the screen. So they provide different levels of service for that. So basically for Patreon, the Joe Budden Network it's his. I know it sounds like network as in I have my own network TV. You can name it whatever. I could name it Wine and Chill Network. It just means hey, this is my Patreon page. It's on Patreon. We could pull up an example, but certain patrons are the people that pay per month to see the creator and what the creator does. Certain creators on Patreon, they are very big on transparency. So they're listen, I'm fundraising to build a video game, or I'm fundraising. If I was on there, mine would say, hey, come watch these videos and help me pay my student loans. So people will say what the money is going towards, then they will show how many patrons. So basically you could just run the math. So for example, let's go be busybody and nosy. 1 second, I'm gonna pull up an example on Patreon for you. He doesn't have his on there, so you can't calculate how much he owes. Let's see, I'm trying to think. I think For Harriet has her numbers on there. For Harriet's great if you ever want to see Black feminist content. Okay, yep, hers is on there, so I'll show you For Harriet's. So let me share hers, and then hold on. Share screen. Window. Okay. So you see For Harriet's. So this is her Patreon, and the way Patreon works, different things. You get different tiers. You pay, and then from the creator, you get different types of programming. So for example, every episode of her podcast. So she does have a podcast, which if I were to listen to a podcast, it would be For Harriet. So $2 a month. So maybe I actually will sign up for that. I can put that in my budget, the $2. So $5 a month, these are all the things you get. So what weird nosy busybodies are looking at is this: 3,826 patrons. 3,826 patrons. Remember this. Say there's somebody paying $50. There's somebody paying this. You don't know how many. Depending on the creator, they will tell you who's getting what. So let's say let's say it's just $2, right? 3,000. I don't forgot the number. Let's say it was 3,000. It was 3,500. I don't know. Y'all know I'm tired. Yes, Johnny. That's why I don't listen to him. I agree. This is just for the purposes of talking about his contract. I personally have never listened to his podcast. Think he's a problematic person. So say with For Harriet's example, 3,500 patrons. It was more than that, but it's the end of the day. I already have forgot the number. Say they were all at the $2 tier. They're not. There are people paying way more than that. That's $7,000 a month. The purpose of Patreon is you can literally fund so much more money through Patreon. So through Patreon, he's probably making a shit ton of money. That was one of the things he said that Rory asked to be on, aka Rory asked for AdSense money, according to Joe. This is all according to Joe because nobody else said anything. Rory asked for AdSense money, according to him. Rory asked for to be on the Patreon. Patreon money is great because it's consistent. You consistently know, like, oh, these are my patrons, unless a bunch of them all of a sudden drop off. This is how much money I'm getting. We could gander to say that depending on how many patrons he's making upwards of $25,000 a month off of Patreon. Most likely, I would guess. One could guess. Patreon is very lucrative. So Patreon is not, there are no specific contracts with Patreon. Patreon does not sponsor people. Patreon just says like, hey, we're hosting this. You pick what tier you want. How much service do you want from Patreon? And then we are going to take out 5%, 8%, or 12%. That's all Patreon does. Spotify, very different. Spotify, for the big podcasters, like, hey, let's have a licensing deal. I only want your podcast will only live on Spotify. Their licensing deals, to be honest, are less podcast and more like show, but people are still calling it podcast, so it's fine. So there's that. And okay, so now to the big blow up where I wrote down exactly what this man said to these people when he wanted to, I guess he was upset. He was upset, child. So the big thing that happened was, let me see in my notes, lawsuit threat. So the podcast that he ranted on and then took off and then put behind a Patreon paywall was 2 hours and 46 minutes. I quickly perused through that and figured out like where it was because I was not about to listen to 2 hours and 46 minutes. So 1 hour at 1 hour, 32 minutes and about like 3 seconds, he then goes on to say, he's like complaining and saying, hey, I encourage them to have their own podcast. And, like they didn't want to do it. And then he went on to say, Rory and Mal can go start a podcast. Well, no, they can't, not at least for another year. By contract, if they do, I'm going to sue the effing pants off of them. But whenever they're able to, they can start a podcast, pay for the staffing, pay for the insurance, studio time, etc. So with that, a lot of people are like, okay, yeah, Patreon is the best one. I need to start a Patreon. Patreon is the best bet. So with that, what is he saying with all of that? He is implying that they have a non-compete. A non-compete, sometimes it will be a standalone agreement. Most of the time is just a clause in your contract. Most companies, if you work in tech, there is a non-compete in your employment agreement. I agree. We're not going to particularly talk about him, but I agree. Yes. So if you work at most companies outside of entry-level retail fast food, you have a non-compete in your agreement. We'll go over like the specifics of like why companies pull a non-compete. They're not always legally enforceable, but that's not really the point. The point is to put enough fear into the employee to get them to not do the behavior that you don't want to do. So for example, when I was in college, I used to teach swim lessons. Now, mind you, I'm broke. I'm in college. See, I can't deal with y'all. Y'all are foolish. Someone made a comment when I first was like, oh, I think I want to do lives. They were like, I don't like lives. The person doing the live, they can never focus. They're always reading the comments. So, I don't want to get yelled at. So when I was in college, I used to teach swim lessons. And in my little tiny, I'm from Miami. I went to University of Central Florida. So we're in Central Florida. My little tiny, like $10 an hour I was getting paid. There was a non-compete in there that said, you are not allowed to teach swim lessons to anyone else. You're not allowed to start your own swim lesson business, blah, blah, blah. And I was like, where do you think that I would have the time to do this? But also it was so aggressively worded. I was like, technically, if I went and taught like my cousin swim lessons and was like, run me $10, technically they would be like, this is a breach of your non-compete. Realistically, would that happen? No, because would I go tell myself no? And then also, would they really sue me over that? No. But if I got bold and decided, hey, you know what I'm going to do 10 minutes from the school? I'm going to go down to the pool over there and be like, hey, can I rent out your pool? I'll give y'all 20%. I'm going to teach you swim lessons. They would have sued me. So that's a non-compete is... Sorry, I was thirsty. A non-compete is basically telling someone like no competition. You cannot compete with me in this specific area. It's specifically defined. So to ensure that people do this, it's in my agreement now with my current company. It's always written in a very interesting way. Non-competes are enforceable. in certain states, not in every state. And the more tailored it is, the more likely the non-compete is going to be enforceable. For example, I work in tech. So if I was an engineer, I'm not an engineer, I'm a tech attorney, which is a little bit, it's different, like how our non-competes are drafted. But for an engineer, it will literally say you cannot work in another fintech in this particular say you worked in a crypto company. You cannot work in another crypto company doing development for this, et cetera, because the idea is that you will take the IP of one company and give it to their competitor. So they don't want you to. Or you're like, you know what? Actually, I'm way smarter than this founder. I'm gonna go start my own crypto company because this is foolishness, which people do. And then companies literally get in lawsuits over it. So he's implying that he has a non-compete in their agreement. For that to be true, that would mean that Joe has a contract with Rory and Mal, which most likely they're not his employees. Most likely they're independent contractors. So in the state of New York, there are very specific rules about that. Also, I pulled up from this lovely law firm this very long detailed chart so you can see like what, poor attorneys do all day, how complicated this actually works in actuality. So hold on, I'm going to pull it up here, or I'm not because I just unshared the screenshot. Let's see. Okay, so you see this chart? So basically, I'm borrowing this chart from Black Read in Britain. So they made this very detailed chart. Also, not legal advice. That's our favorite thing to say. This is not legal advice. So basically it goes through like, hey, is it permitted in this state? What's the statute? What are the certain things you can do? What's legitimate interest? So you can only protect certain things. Trade secrets is generally protected. Trade secrets would be, if we go back to like my crypto example, trade secrets in crypto are probably like, okay, how does blockchain technology apply to Dogecoin? Or how does it apply to Bitcoin? Like what is a trade secret of this as to how are we even tracking all of this? Most people cannot tell you how Bitcoin and blockchain work, but you know who can? The people that work at these companies. So that's most likely categorized under trade secret. So then continued employment is sufficient consideration. So there are a lot of details that go into trade secrets. If you scroll down to New York, which I don't know where they live. I'm just assuming it's New York. In New York, non-competes are legal, but they do have certain parameters. So these are the things that you can do. So cases are split. So enforceable against employee terminated with or without cause, cases are split. So termination without cause, is, hey, I'm tired of you. Basically what he did, where he got on his podcast and was like, you know what? You're fired. That's what's happening. So great. Oh, thank you guys. So contracts are messy. Yes, you always have to read the fine print. So one of the things that is going to play out, he was like, okay, after a year. So he basically said like, hey, this non-compete that he is alleging is in their employment agreement is only for a year. Okay, so after a year, maybe they'll go start a podcast. There are ways around a non-compete. Non-competes are not automatically enforceable. You have to go to court to enforce them. So you have to send not Kevin Samuel's voice, child. I'm gonna pretend I don't understand the because I don't understand the Y'all know I'm like low-key old lady. I'm like, what does that mean? So for non-competes, it's not like, oh, I told you, Stephanie, that you can't teach us swim lessons. You can't do it. Yeah, if I'm like a terrified person, which I generally am, okay, fine, I'm not going to do it. But if I was bold, I'm like, is she really it was a woman that owned the company. Is she really going to come after me if I start, this 5-person swim lesson on the side and make some money? People do it. People test the waters. So then it's always, are you, the employer, bold enough to come and sue the employee? Some people are. If you work for a company, yes, they are 100% empowered to sue you, to make an example out of you. I have worked at companies that have sued former employees and have made an example and told the rest of the employee population, you see what they did? You see clause A, exhibit B of your employee agreement? Don't do that. We will sue you. So basically, if Rory wanted to be bold and wanted to see, he would start the podcast and see what happens. Because what's going to happen is if he were to do that, if Rory and Mal were like, you know what, screw your little non-compete, I'm going to start my podcast, Joe will have to sue them. And lawsuits are not things that get resolved overnight. The quickest lawsuit that we have seen resolved on this channel is Nike versus Mischief. And the whole thing gave publicity stunt, to be honest. The vibe of the whole thing was, I feel like this is giving publicity stunt. Like, nobody gave the shoes back. Nobody really cared. It was just kind of like, oh, well, I don't want people to think that I made the bloody shoes by Nike, so let me sue them. But like, I'm not really invested. Court systems, judges, lawyers are very slow, love to take long. So if Rory and Mal were to start their podcast tomorrow because they want to be bold, that means tomorrow is Friday. Joe can't file at the courthouse till Monday. He files on Monday. He would probably file like an injunctive relief to say like, hey, you need to stop them from doing this behavior. Anything. So monetary damages are run me my money. And then I agree. I agree with all these negative comments about this man. I'm being honest. But on this channel, you know, I always try to be impartial. There are also a lot more people in here than usual, so that's interesting. Try to be impartial and just legally. I think that he would win a non-compete against them? Technically, in entertainment, it's much easier to enforce a non-compete. Like, people have lost entire careers. Like, models have, unfortunately, because they haven't read it for whatever reason, signed non-competes with photographers. That photographers are like, you can only work with me on certain things. And courts have held it up, which is trifling, completely trifling. I personally don't believe in non-competes. Like, I think that, yes, confidentiality, yes, you shouldn't be allowed to tell people my confidential information. Yes, that's different from a non-compete. A non-compete is you cannot do what you are trained to do for a certain amount of time, regardless of what information you have. Which is why non-competes, they don't really work in the legal sense, because lawyers, you know, we go to law school for 3 years. We have learned things. It's just learned knowledge. It's okay. Yeah, your raggedy business is the same as the other raggedy business I worked at. Like, what does it matter? Versus with non-competes, they argue that lay people like, oh, you only learn these things because my company is doing them and because I taught them to you. I don't particularly think that's fair. So Workaholic said, can Rory, I keep saying it wrong, sorry. Can Rory sue Joe for slander when he made those disparaging comments about him? This is a great question. Yes, he can. And libel, because it's in a fixed format. He could sue him if he wanted to. But yep. So he can definitely sue them if he wants to. But again, lawsuits are not necessarily always worth the filing fee. So CS Guy said the non-compete will most likely be void because Joe fired them. So that's actually not an element of enforcing a non-compete. It doesn't matter who gets fired. It doesn't matter if you willingly left or if they fired you. So that's like not an element. The element is basically, is this enforceable? Is it tailored enough to be specific to say, okay, you cannot do podcasts that are specifically about, like, what's the podcast about? Mess, child? Hotep mess. Listening to it for 2 hours, I was like, what is this? Like, what is this y'all have me listening to? Whatever the podcast is about, you cannot do podcasts about this. If he decided, hey, I'm going to do a podcast about, you know, drinking wine, that would be a different story. Like, I'm pretty sure if Joe then decided to enforce his quote unquote non-compete, the judge would be like, this is not the same thing. You can't tell the man not to talk. So it has to be like very narrowly tailored. We can actually pull up here. I'm going to pull up our little legal chart that I've borrowed from this law firm. Child, y'all know I cannot see this and I'm blind. Hold on. Let me zoom in. So here we go. So protectable / legitimate interest. So what are the things that you can do? What are the things you can protect against? Trade secrets. So this is just for New York, because I'm just going to assume New York. Trade secrets, confidential information, goodwill, on-air persona of broadcasters. Ding, ding, ding. Employees' unique or extraordinary services. So for some odd reason, because again, I don't agree with non-competes. Listen, child, I don't, you know, that's not it's not my business. Y'all done dragged me into this messy mess. So what was he fooling with y'all? On-air persona of broadcasters. So on-air persona of broadcasters, maybe he could go to a judge and be like, hey, I developed Rory and Mal. These two were two introverted people before they met me. They were never on-air personas. They were never in this persona of like whatever the persona on the podcast is. Like, say like one is the antagonizer, like one is like the nice person, or like whatever the premise is, because child, I don't know. They would then, like, you have to tailor enough. If they went on to make a show that was identical in format, identical in like, okay, we're going to do our same little shtick, maybe Joe could enforce it. It also depends on like how the contract is written. So these are a lot of assumptions on our end because, again, he talked about the contract, but because there are confidentiality clauses in it, he did not show the contract. So I have no idea. Question, but if they were going to start a YouTube channel with, here we go, let me just put it up here, chat, with videos of long conversations for talking and not call it a podcast, is that allowed? That's the thing. Non-competes are so silly. It's not about the name of it. It's about like, what are you actually doing? So is that in the same format as a podcast? Maybe. Is any of it enforceable? All of non-competes are a maybe. They're not a hard line. So like, for example, hostile work environment. They could countersue him and be like, this is a hostile work environment that we've been in. You know, you're over here antagonizing me. Apparently they were trying to fight at one point. Like I don't understand. I'm not even begin to pretend to understand like what was happening over there. So I think if he were to sue them for trying, they would then countersue him for hostile work environment, harassment, maybe defamation, depending. I mean, but remember, defamation, the complete defense of defamation is the truth. So for example, he said, what did he say? He said like, oh, I think he like implied that one of them is lazy. I mean, if you can prove that, then what are they going to say? So that is that. Let me see if we had anything else. Oh, I done clicked out of the PowerPoint slide. What is happening? It's a wonderful day. But yeah, I would be very curious to see if they are bold enough to even do it. That's the first question, because if they are not, then it's a complete moot point. But again, to what he's trying to achieve and what most employers are trying to achieve is that it doesn't matter. It matters to an extent. It doesn't really matter whether it's enforceable. What matters is what the employee thinks, because you're trying to control behavior. So if the employee is afraid enough of you to be like, damn, I got fired from this jackass, but also I don't want them to like terrorize me. So like, whatever, what's a year? Then you've achieved your goal as, you know, an ass employer who doesn't want the person to do whatever behavior. So that is that. All right. So let's see. Okay, so the last part that I wanted to mention about this before we do calls, exactly. This is kind of, I agree with Tony. Just like any relationship, if things don't work out, I would never say or try to stop anyone from making money, even if it's not with me. Like, that seems a little disingenuous. It's just rude. You already fired them. Like, what does it matter? You don't have to be bothered with them. If you don't like it, don't listen to it. Like, what's the purpose of this? So let me pull up my notes, and so I can beat the dead horse that is me telling y'all that contracts are your friend. So I think their names were Ian and Corey. That's what I wrote in my notes. So hopefully they're their names. The other people that work with Joe on the podcast. And they went into like a 5-minute like bro happy session of like, see, we don't have contracts and our friendship is fine, which is the stupidest thing I've heard this week. And it's Thursday, so I've heard a lot of silly things. You should always have a contract. Because if you don't have a contract with someone that is giving you money that you have worked for and you have earned, you are getting charity. They can just stop paying you. You have no right to any of that. You will then have to go through a Pat the Manager. Yes, we're live every Thursday instead of maybe every Thursday, child. We're going to revisit that Thursdays-ish instead of Fridays. You're going to have a Pat the Manager, Chance the Rapper situation where one of them remembers, hey, you said 15%. The other one is like, I said $10. That's not exactly what was in that lawsuit. You should watch that video. But you get what I'm saying? You should always have a contract. It avoids arguments because then you just point at the contract and be like, hey, we agreed to this. If this is not working for you, let me know. We don't have to do this anymore. That's fine. Release me. I completely agree. That's why workers want to unionize, contracts, and accountability. Correct. Oh, I'm glad. Thank you for subbing. So you should always have a contract. I mean, working with friends is a very difficult thing. So if you're going to work with your friend, like you should value your friendship more than whatever money you're getting. Just have the contract and have an honest conversation. Like, hey, you're my friend, but this is a business. I wanted to run XYZ manner. I put it in the contract. You know, I want us to wake up at 5 o'clock and we need to do this and we need to film this and then it's done. Are you okay with that? Yes, no, maybe. Okay, cool. And that's done. So basically, Candace, is a good question. If Mal and Rory, I know we all saying this poor man's name. Sorry, sir. I apologize. Started a podcast, but switched it up a little bit and added trivia, for example. This is a great question. Or games. Would the non-compete still stand since it's podcast adjacent? That's what people try to do to get out of non-competes. They are like, okay, well, I'm going to go into this other slightly different field. It all depends on how the non-compete is written. So non-competes, the more specific, the better for the employer if they go to sue. However, the more broad, the better for the employer in actual enforcing it, into telling you like you cannot do any of these things. So which is why sorry, I was reading it. Which is why non-competes are never yes or no. I would think, to be honest, the format would automatically be different because the show is not based off of Rory and Mal. The show is Joe Budden and Rory and Mal. So automatically a podcast with just the two of them, even like if it was just Rory, is a completely different thing. It's one person, you know, like maybe he has different interests. Maybe he wants to talk about like sneakers. Like he's only going to talk about sneakers and trivia. Is that the same thing as talking about, again, whatever the heck they're talking about over there? They could try Twitch. It's less about the format. It's less, not about the format. It's less about the platform and more about the format. Like Twitch, a good lawyer could argue a Twitch is a podcast. It's the same thing. A good lawyer would be like, these are the similarities. Like yesterday, the Childish Gambino lawsuit that we went over yesterday, a good lawyer will sit there and be like, 95% of this is different, but this 5% is what matters. And this 5%, I want $5 million for this 5%. So it's all about, they basically talk pop culture and current events. Okay, so yeah, so if they were gonna say like, hey, we're only talking international events, is that different? Just up for a judge to decide, which is why most non-competes get thrown out because it's too ambiguous. You cannot stop, like we are a right to work country. Like one of your liberties in America is to work yourself to death. So we are right to work. So you can't stop people from working. A non-compete is to allegedly promote businesses to have better competition because you just don't want people stealing your ideas and stealing like your intellectual property and what you've worked for. It's a lot less tangible in an entertainment sense because entertainment is very personality based. How I act here is how I'm going to act. Like if it's me and Chelsea and Jasmine, or if it's me and my boyfriend, or if it's me and whatever, like is that different? Is it the same? Like judges are much less likely, but it's literally ad hoc. There's no clean line with non-competes, which is why Joe is threatening them because the threat is worth more. The bark is worth more than the bite. The bite is let's go through this long lawsuit and see what happens. So, all right. So now that we've gone through everything, there are a lot more people in here as usual. So I will nervously stop sharing, we can call in. So parameters of how calling in works. No legal advice, no legal questions. You can't ask me your legal questions because honey, I'm not going to answer you because free legal advice is not good legal advice. Also, I don't take private clients anymore. So I'm going to put this in here if any of you want to call in, or I'm not because it's like not working. Me and the technology are doing freaking great. Thank you. I try to keep it. We're at 45 minutes. Perfect. That's exactly what I thought we would be at. So we can do a few calls. And if not, then we are all set on our Thirsty Thursday, Taco Thursday. Taco Tuesday only makes sense to me, but we'll see. Oh, thank you, Sharni. Yes, you guys should like and subscribe because I'm almost to 10K, which would, be very kind of you. So please subscribe. This is usually the format for the lives. And then thank you. This is usually the format for the lives. Sometimes they're finance-based, as I am for the 50th time paying off my student loans. So always try to keep us on the up and up with that. And yeah, if not, I redid the playlist. So if you guys want to peruse around, there's one for just like wine and lawsuits. So like everything like the Google case, there's some Trump stuff scattered in there, Dominion, obviously entertainment law. It's heavily entertainment law focused. So then I gave entertainment law its own little section so you guys can peruse around that. So yeah. Well, thank you guys. This was lovely. I like Thursday. Let me know. How do you feel about Thursday? I think Thursday is better. So now you guys get your Fridays back and go outside, socially distance, safe, child. I think we should keep hey, Kareen. I think we should keep the 6 feet, but I like not being close to people. Stephanie's thoughts for Thursday. That's good. It's a good play on words, which is funny. I like that one. I like Thursday. Good. Well, thank you guys for all joining. I really appreciate it. And I will see y'all maybe. Okay, so actually, let's have a little honesty. Some weeks, nothing is happening. So on those weeks, do you still want to do a live and we'll just pick a random topic ad hoc? Or would you rather just skip the week? Let me know. And then I'll let y'all go to dinner. I saw. So yes, you still want to have the live? Okay. All right. So we'll still have the live. Okay. So yeah. So those weeks. All right. So then I'll just, on the weeks that nothing is going on, really, I will just do Instagram is so much easier. So to be honest. So if you want to know, I'm going to try let you know beforehand what I'm drinking so you guys can drink along, at least the type of wine and then the brand too. So if the brand is by you. And so then I'll let you guys know on the days I'm there's nothing happening, child. And I'll just put send me questions or AMA or what topics do y'all want? And I'll just do that on Instagram. So Instagram is at Wine and Chill. So I appreciate all of you. And on that note, have a lovely Thursday evening. Bye.